Hello everyone, my name is Arthur Miller, and I'm 71 years old now. My whole life, from my younger days until my hair turned gray, has been about three things: hard work, saving every penny, and a simple dream. The dream was to live out my golden years quietly, with my grandchildren. But life has a way of throwing you a curveball, doesn't it? Sometimes, a single sentence is all it takes to shatter your entire world. If he's living here, we'll never have a life of our own. Just a few words. That's all it took. But those words, spoken in the entryway of my own daughter's house, the very place I believed I would spend my final days, they left me frozen to the spot. I couldn't move. I couldn't even speak. It felt like the blood had stopped flowing in my veins. My chest grew tight, and the whole world around me suddenly went blurry. My name is Arthur Miller. I'm 71. I worked my entire life, saved every last dime, and never spent money on anything fancy. I managed to put away a little nest egg, over $350,000. Now, that might not sound like a fortune to some folks, but for a plumber like me, it was everything. It was my whole life's work, the sum of all my sweat and tears from years of back-breaking labor. That money was for my retirement. It was for the day when my body got too old and weak to take care of itself. It was so I could live with my grandchildren, watch them grow up, and hear their laughter fill the house every single day. But I never imagined, you see, that day was the first time I was supposed to step inside my daughter's house, the place I thought would be my new and final home. I was just bending over, untying the laces on my scuffed-up old work boots, when I heard something unexpected. It was my son-in-law's voice coming from the kitchen. He was talking to my daughter, his wife. His voice wasn't loud, but every word struck me like a sharp knife, straight to the heart. "If he's living here," he said, "how are we supposed to have a normal life?" My heart just seized up. A normal life. Those words echoed in my head like thunder. And in that one moment, I understood everything. I wasn't a father. They wanted to welcome into their home. I was a burden. I was an obstacle standing in the way of their normal life. I didn't say a word. Not a single word of blame, not one complaint. I just quietly, slowly, bent back down and retied my boots. The same boots I had taken off just moments before, filled with so much hope. Now, they felt heavy with disappointment and pain. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as if I were carrying a great heavy stone on my back. Inside my heart, the springtime I thought was just beginning to bloom had suddenly withered and died. My simple dream, the one of spending a peaceful old age with my grandkids, was shattered into a million pieces right there on their doorstep. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a much crueler truth. To get my hands on the money I have today, that nest egg of over $350,000, I lived through a lifetime of diligent, quiet work. I'm a plumber. It's not a glamorous job, not one that gets a lot of attention, but it's an essential one. I started in this trade when I was just 18 years old, right after I graduated from high school. For more than half a century, I wrestled with pipes and valves, crawling into dark spaces and working in the cold. I was the one who quietly kept the heat running for families during the most bitter winters, the one who made sure clean, safe water flowed into their homes. My life has certainly had its share of ups and downs. I lost my wife far too young, which left me to raise our daughter all on my own. For the past 20 years, since she grew up and started her own family, I've been living alone in the same small, old house. I never went on trips, never ate out at restaurants, and never really got together with friends. My meals were usually something simple, a couple of fried eggs on toast or a can of soup with crackers. It was a modest way to eat, but it was always enough to keep me healthy and strong enough to do my job every day. Instead of spending money on myself, I saved it. Every single month, every single year, I carefully put away what little I could from my paycheck, dollar by dollar, into a savings account at the bank. The thought of indulging in any kind of luxury never once crossed my mind. All I had was one simple, humble dream: to live out my old age in peace. without ever becoming a burden on my daughter. I told myself that I had to save enough money to be able to support myself when I could no longer work, to stand on my own 2 feet without having to rely on anyone. And then, one afternoon, I went to the bank to check my balance. As I stood there looking at the numbers printed on the ATM receipt, tears started to well up in my eyes. The number was $367,486. It wasn't just a figure on a piece of paper, it was the result of long, hard years of back-breaking labor. It was the physical proof of all the sweat, the sacrifice, and the loneliness I had endured. It was a testament to a single father's quiet perseverance and the simple dream that had kept him going. I never intended to spend all that money. I figured I would just use a little of it for my daily living expenses. All I ever hoped for was that when my body grew too weak and I couldn't work anymore, I would be able to live with my daughter and her family. I imagined I could help with chores around the house, pick up my grandkids from school every afternoon, and sit around the same dinner table with them every night, just to hear their innocent laughter. A simple, peaceful life with the people I loved. That was the entirety of my dream. So I called my daughter and told her I was ready to retire. She sounded so happy on the phone, letting out a cheer and telling me to move in as soon as I could. Hearing those words filled my heart with a profound sense of happiness. I thought to myself that my dream was finally, after all these years, about to come true. I packed my belongings. There wasn't much, just a few sets of old clothes, some keepsakes from my late wife, and a small wooden bird I had carved myself, with my grandson's name etched into the bottom. I asked a kind neighbor to give me a ride down to the station. On the train heading toward my daughter's town, it felt like spring was in full bloom right inside my chest. I pictured it all so clearly, living with my grandchildren, helping take care of them, making new memories together. I truly believed, in that moment, that my life had finally found its safe harbor. The drive to my daughter Sarah's house was a short one, but for me, it felt like the most important journey of my life, a trip filled with hope and a quiet, profound expectation. I arrived on a Saturday afternoon, just as the golden light of the setting sun was washing over the entire street, making the rows of neat suburban homes glow. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk in front of her new house. It was a fine-looking place, clean and well-kept, with a small manicured lawn. In my hands, I held 2 small suitcases and a few modest gifts I had brought with me. Tucked carefully inside one bag was the most important one of all, a small, wooden bird I had carved by hand, with my grandson Leo's name etched carefully into the base. It was a gift I had poured my entire heart into making. I walked up the concrete path and pressed the doorbell. My heart was thumping in my chest, a rapid, joyful rhythm. It wasn't a pulse of worry, but one of pure anticipation. This was the moment I had been waiting for so long. The door swung open, and there was Sarah, her face absolutely radiant. The second she saw me, a wide, happy grin spread across her face. She rushed forward, throwing her arms around me in a tight embrace, and cried out in a voice full of excitement, "Dad, you're here. Oh, I'm so glad. Come on, get inside." Her words were like a warm breeze, chasing away all the weariness from my journey. I just nodded, a gentle smile on my face. I bent down, untying the laces of my old work boots, ready to place them neatly by the door before stepping across the threshold. I was about to begin a new life, the life I had always dreamed of, but right at that very moment, an unexpected sound cut through the air. It was the voice of my son-in-law Mark, coming from the kitchen, and his voice was laced with an undeniable tone of annoyance and frustration, one he didn't even bother to hide. Every single word he spoke was like a sharp needle, piercing straight through my heart. "Your dad is moving in? Sarah, if he's living here, how are we ever supposed to have a life of our own? We're still trying for another baby, you know." It felt as if someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with an ice-cold hand. I froze, standing completely still. It was as if all the other sounds in the world had faded away, and only Mark's callous voice was left, echoing over and over in my head. How are we supposed to have a life of our own? Another baby. His words were a verdict, a final judgment passed down on me. I wasn't just a burden. I was an obstacle, a roadblock standing in the way of their life and their future. Sarah fell silent. She didn't object. She didn't say a single word to defend me, and her silence was more painful to me than any words could ever be. In that quiet, heavy moment, I understood everything. Her silence told me that she, too, didn't want me here. She, too, saw me as a burden, as a problem that needed to be solved. I was still standing there, half paralyzed. One of my feet was just over the threshold. My hand was still gripping the handle of my suitcase. My boots were untied, but my feet couldn't bring themselves to step any further inside. I felt like an abandoned soul, a man with no place in his own family. The dream of a peaceful old age with my grandchildren, of a comfortable home filled with their laughter, it all shattered into a million tiny, sharp pieces right there in front of my eyes. Quietly, I turned back around. I forced a stiff, unnatural smile onto my face, trying my best to hide the crushing pain and disappointment that was welling up inside me. Oh, you know, I think I left my medication in the cab. I'll just run back and get it. It was a lie. I hadn't forgotten any medication. It was just an excuse, a way for me to leave quietly without having to confront the painful truth that was staring me in the face. I bent down, slowly retied the laces on my boots, and stepped back out the front door. I walked away from the home I had dreamed of, leaving behind every last ounce of hope I had brought with me. And I never went back. I never went back to get my medication. I never went back for my bags. And I never went back to face the people who had shattered my hopes with a few cold, careless words. The door that I once believed would welcome me into my future was now closed to me forever, sealing away all of my broken dreams inside. After I left my daughter's house, I didn't go far. I had no idea where I was supposed to go. The old house I used to live in was locked up, and I didn't have the key anymore. The few dollars I had in my wallet were barely enough to cover a train ticket to anywhere. It felt as if the entire world was crumbling down right in front of my eyes. A deep, heavy wave of pain and disappointment washed over me, and I felt completely lost. I found an empty bench at the nearby train station and just sat down. A light rain had started to fall. The tiny, cold drops landed on my cheeks, wetting my face and mixing with the tears that I couldn't seem to stop. I didn't know where to go home. I didn't know what to do next. I just sat there, all alone in the cold of the night, with my small travel bag for a pillow, staring out into the vast, empty space before me. Time passed by so slowly. Trains would pull into the station and then depart, one after the other, filled with hurried passengers rushing to get to their destinations. I watched them, saw all their unfamiliar faces, and I had never felt so profoundly alone in my entire life. I kept asking myself, how did my life end up like this? Why was my one simple, humble dream shattered so completely, so cruelly? Sometime late that night, a station attendant was making his rounds and saw me sitting there all alone in the rain. He was a middle-aged man with a kind face. He stopped in front of my bench and asked me if I was in some kind of trouble, if there was anything he could do to help. I managed to force a tight, strained smile. My voice came out as a hoarse whisper, but it was filled with a sadness so deep it felt bottomless. "I'm waiting for a train," I told him, "one that goes back to the past." The man looked at me, a little confused, but he didn't press me for any more answers. He just gave me a quiet nod and went back to his duties. I suppose he was probably used to seeing all sorts of lost souls at the station. In the middle of the night, people who had nowhere else to go. So I stayed there on that bench, listening to the soft sound of the rain and the distant whistle of the trains, and I thought about my whole life. I had dedicated every day to working hard, to loving my family, to making sacrifices for them. And now, here I was, sitting all by myself at a train station, without a home to go to, without a single person to turn to. Just as dawn was breaking, as the first pale light of morning began to streak across the sky, something unexpected happened. Someone had called the police. They reported that an old man was wandering around the station and seemed to be showing signs of dementia. And so, I was taken down to the police station. They asked me a lot of questions at the station. I told them my story, clearly and in order. In my travel bag, they found my bank book, my ID, and a small address book with a list of contacts. Everything was right where it should be. Then, one of the officers placed my cell phone on the table in front of me. The screen lit up, and I saw my daughter's name. Sarah. She had been trying to call me over and over again. I just stared at the phone, my mind a complete mess. I didn't know if I should answer it. I remembered Mark's sharp words. I remembered Sarah's heavy silence. I didn't pick up. Right then, I didn't want to hear any excuses they might have. I needed time. Time to think. I needed a quiet place to let my heart begin to heal. I needed a moment of peace to figure out where to go from here, all on my own. That phone call, to me, it didn't feel like it came from a place of real concern. It felt like it was born from confusion, from a sense of obligation, and I couldn't bring myself to accept that. I knew, in that moment, that the rest of my life was about to head in a completely new direction. A direction I had never ever imagined before. After that long night at the train station, and the few hours I spent at the police station, they finally let me go. The last place on earth I wanted to be was that station. I decided to head back to my old house. It wasn't my permanent home anymore, but at least it was a place that felt safe, a place I knew. I remembered that I'd left a spare key with my kind neighbor. I walked over and knocked on her door, and the look of complete surprise on her face when she saw me was plain as day. Without a word, she handed the key right back to me. The house I walked back into was thick with dust. Nothing had changed since the day I'd left. An old wedding photograph of my daughter, Sarah, and her husband, Mark, was still hanging on the living room wall. It seemed to mock me now, a constant reminder of a happiness that felt like a lie. The framed picture of my late wife was still sitting in its place of honor, on the mantelpiece, the spot where I used to pause every single morning just to say hello to her. Looking at those pictures filled my heart with a sadness so deep, it felt like it had no bottom. As I was trying to straighten things up a bit, a small letter arrived for me. The mailman had brought it, delivered to my old address since that's where my mail was still being sent. When I tore it open, the wobbly, childish handwriting made my heart ache. It was from my grandson, Leo. "Grandpa," it said, "Mommy told me you're not coming to live with us. It makes me really sad. Are you mad at her? I promise we can have sleepovers again, just like we used to." My hands trembled as I read his words over and over. My grandson's innocent, pure words reached a place deep inside me that I thought had gone cold. He didn't understand what had happened. All he knew was that his grandpa wasn't coming, and it made him sad. He was worried I was angry with his mother, and all he wanted was for things to be like they were before, for us to have our sleepovers. I could just picture his innocent smile, hear his clear, bright laughter, and now, the memory of it only twisted the knife in my heart. Tucked in with Leo's note was a second letter, this one from my daughter. I picked it up and stared at the envelope, at the familiar handwriting I knew so well. I knew what it was. It was an apology. I knew she wanted to explain herself, to try and justify what she had done. But I didn't open it. I couldn't bring myself to read it. Because an apology, when it comes too late, is just an empty gesture. It's nothing more than a formality. An apology is meaningless if it doesn't come with real regret, with a real change of heart. I was too hurt, too deeply disappointed. The wounds they had given me were not the kind that could be healed with a few simple words of regret. I placed Sarah's letter down on the table, still sealed. I didn't want to read it. I wanted to hold on to the last image I had of her in my mind. Even if it was one of silence, one of betrayal. I knew then that from this day forward, I had to live for myself. I had to find my own peace, my own happiness, and I was not going to let a late, hollow apology shake that new resolve. In the days that followed, I lived alone in my old house, doing my best to find some quiet and get my heart back in order. I hadn't tried to contact my daughter, Sarah, or her husband, Mark, and after the first few of their calls went unanswered, they stopped trying to reach me, too. But that quiet, that little bit of peace I had found, didn't last very long. About a week later, I started getting strange phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. When I answered, it was always an unfamiliar voice on the other end. "Is this Arthur Miller?" one of them asked. "I was told you have over $350,000 in savings. Have you ever considered investing in some beachfront property?" I hung up the phone immediately. But then another call came, and then another, all with the same kind of pitch. A deep sense of unease started to creep into my bones. How did these strangers know about my savings? That money was supposed to be my secret. Only a handful of people were meant to know about it. Me, my daughter, my son-in-law, and my lawyer. That was it. Then one afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found an anonymous letter inside. There was no name, no return address, just a plain white envelope. When I opened it and read the single line typed inside, it felt like my heart had stopped beating altogether. They say an old man living all alone with a lot of money is prone to accidents. I started to shake. A cold sweat broke out all over my body. This wasn't some clumsy sales pitch for an investment. This was a threat. It was a direct and unmistakable threat against my life. It was suddenly crystal clear that someone out there knew about my money, and they were planning to do something about it. I couldn't take it anymore. I went straight down to the police station. I walked in and told the officer at the desk everything. I told him about my life savings, the $350,000. I told him about the suspicious phone calls and, with a trembling hand, I showed him the threatening letter. The police officer listened to my whole story very carefully, taking notes as I spoke. When I had finished, he looked at me with a serious expression and said, "Sir, it's possible that someone in your own family leaked the information about your savings." I didn't need to guess who it was. The officer's words only confirmed the terrible suspicion that had been slowly growing in the back of my mind. Because, when you really thought about it, who else could it have been? Besides my family, who else in the world would have known that I had that much money? Only my daughter and my son-in-law knew the exact amount. They knew all about the money I had scraped together over a lifetime. And they must have either told someone about it or they were planning something themselves. The sharp, bitter pain of their betrayal washed over me all over again. But this time it was stronger, more terrifying than ever before. They hadn't just abandoned me and cast me aside. Now, they had put my very life in danger. I felt like a hunted animal. My old house, the one place where I had hoped to find a little bit of comfort and safety, now felt like a trap, a place filled with unseen dangers. I knew I couldn't go on living in this constant state of fear. I had to do something. I had to protect myself. And I had to protect the money I had spent my entire life working for. And right then, a new idea began to take shape in my mind. A major decision that I knew would change the entire course of my life. After the threatening letter and my talk with the police, I came to a hard realization. I could not go on living in this constant state of fear and anxiety. The old house, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a place of potential danger, a trap waiting to be sprung. I knew right then that the time had come for me to make a drastic decision, one that would change the entire course of my life. I had to protect myself, and I had to put an end, once and for all, to any connection with the people who had turned my life into a tragedy. And so, I made my decision. The first thing I did was go to the bank and withdraw my entire life savings. Every last cent of the more than $367,000 I had scraped together over a lifetime of back-breaking work. I wasn't going to keep a single penny for myself. I didn't want that money to be a target anymore, a reason for people to bother me, a source of trouble and danger. I was going to use that money for something meaningful, something I had always kept in my heart. I donated $100,000 to a scholarship fund for children in poor, rural communities. I could still clearly remember my own difficult childhood, growing up with nothing on a small farm. I hoped this money would give kids like me a chance to go to school. to get an education, and to change their own lives for the better. Next, I gave another $100,000 to build a new community center in my late wife's hometown. It was a small, struggling town that didn't have many resources. I wanted to build a place where people could gather, learn new things, and grow together. It was also my way of honoring the memory of my dear wife, of leaving something good in the place she had loved so much. The rest of the money, over $160,000, I broke up into smaller amounts and sent it to various anonymous charities, all across the country. I didn't want to be known, and I certainly didn't want any praise or recognition. I just wanted to be useful. I wanted to share what I had with people who truly needed it. I hoped that this money, which had become such a heavy burden and a source of danger for me, could now become a source of hope, a small ray of light for people living through hard times. After I had finished all the paperwork and the money transfers were complete, I went back to my old house one last time. I didn't take anything with me. I just wrote a short note on a single piece of paper and taped it to the front door. It said, "I own nothing anymore. If it's money you're after, you've come to the wrong place." That was my final declaration. I wanted the people who were scheming to use me to know that there was nothing left for them to take. I had, with my own two hands, freed myself from every material thing that tied me down. And then, I changed my phone number and deleted all of my social media accounts. I wanted to disappear completely from the lives of the people who once called me Dad, the people who had brought me so much pain. I didn't want to have any contact with them ever again. I didn't want them to know where I was or what I was doing. I wanted to start a new life, one that wasn't haunted by sad memories and wasn't chained to toxic relationships. I didn't have a penny left in my bank account. The house was no longer mine. I had given up everything I had spent my entire life saving. But as I walked away, a strange and powerful feeling of relief washed over my heart. I hadn't been defeated. I had liberated myself. I was disappearing, not because I was weak, but because I was choosing a different path. A path that led to real peace and true freedom. Well, everyone, my name is Arthur Miller. And with that, my story for today comes to a close. All my life, I tried to do the right thing. I worked diligently. I loved my family, and I made sacrifices for them. But it took just one sentence, a few cold, cruel words, to show me exactly where I stood in their hearts. In that single moment, I finally understood that to them, I wasn't a father to be respected. I was just a burden. I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of their life. Older folks don't need to be coddled. We don't need expensive gifts or a lot of empty, pretty words that don't mean anything. What we want, what we need, is simply to be allowed to exist with our own dignity, to be seen as people. We don't want our value to be measured by what we can provide financially, to be judged on whether we're worth the space we happen to take up in a room. A parent's love for a child is a boundless thing. We are willing to sacrifice everything we have for our children. But that willingness does not give children the right to take advantage of that love, or to trample all over it. The moment family affection becomes a matter of transactions and cold calculations, it loses the sacred, beautiful meaning it was always meant to have. So, if you are lucky enough to still have your parents with you, please, I ask you to remember this. Love doesn't start with the question, "Dad, how much money do you have?" It begins with something much, much simpler. It begins with asking, "Dad, are you tired?" It's such a simple question, isn't it? But it holds all the care, all the genuine affection in the world. It shows that you're concerned about their health, about their feelings, not just about what's in their bank account. Give them your time. Listen to what they have to say. Talk with them. Because there are some wounds, once they're carved into a person's heart, that no amount of money in the world can ever hope to heal. As for me, I have found a real and true sense of peace now. I don't have any assets anymore. I don't have a house, and I no longer have any contact with my daughter or my son-in-law. But what I've gained in return is peace of mind and a true, unshakable sense of freedom. I've lived an honest life, and I am proud of that. I believe that the life of an older person isn't a burden. It is a valuable example, and it is a lesson for all the generations that follow. To all of you who have taken the time to listen to my story, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your willingness to listen has been a great comfort to me. I hope we can meet again for the next story.